Welcome to part 8 of my video series, A Rabbi Encounters the Universe. This is part of the section, A Rabbi Encounters God, Miracles. And today I want to speak about miracles because many people believe that miracles are proof that God exists. They'll point to a miracle somewhere where God changed the laws of nature and say that that points to the existence of God. The classical example within Jewish tradition was in Judah Halevi's great book, The Kuzari, where he convinces the king of Khazar to convert to Judaism. The king of Khazar had already heard a philosopher in the tradition of Aristotle, a Christian and a Muslim, and then a rabbi came to speak with him, and the rabbi said that God exists because of what happened at Mount Sinai, that 600,000 people, in truth, it was 600,000 men of military age, so probably counting the women and those above military age, closer to 3 million people, saw the events on Mount Sinai and the lightning and the thunder and the earthquake and the fire and saw the presence of God. And that is proof that a miracle took place. But there's a problem with that. The problem was already pointed out by the great philosophical skeptic and atheist David Hume. And David Hume said, we don't see miracles. And anybody who claims to have seen a miracle has the burden of proof on them. To quote Hume, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as firm and unalterable experiences establish these laws, the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is an entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. What he's saying is that if you claim you saw a miracle, you better bring some pretty strong proof, because human experience says that the laws of nature run by the laws of nature. My favorite teaching regarding miracles was from Spinoza, who had been kicked out of the Jewish community for some of his teachings. And Spinoza thought that people look at nature and say that God is not around when nature goes about its natural processes. And then one day the seas part or the sun stands still and something happens, and as if God came forward and nature stops going about its natural tendencies. So either we see God or we see nature, but Spinoza says we have it all wrong. We ought to be seeing the miracle not in God reaching down and changing the laws of nature, but in nature itself. That God acts in nature, that nature is the miracle. When Einstein was asked if he believed in God, he said he believed in Spinoza's God. And for many religious people, viewing nature itself is the miracle. To quote the Romantic poet William Blake, to see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wildflower, holding infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour, auguries of innocence. To see a miracle in nature. What's interesting is that idea that miracles are not changes in nature, but miracles are actually built into nature is a very authentic Jewish idea. And there's a number of rabbinic sources that point in that direction. Let me give you a couple of my favorites. One of them comes from Avodah Zarah 54b in the Talmud, and it speaks about somebody who steals some wheat, a seller of wheat, and plants it. And according to the Talmud, the wheat should not grow. It's stolen. Why would God cause stolen wheat to grow? But the Talmud continues, Olam kaminhago noheg v'holech. The world goes according to its laws. God does not change the laws of nature so that a miracle will take place. That if you steal a seller of wheat, it'll grow. And that same Talmudic passage said, if somebody commits adultery, a woman and gets pregnant, she should not have a successful pregnancy because of the sin. Neither should the man with whom she committed adultery successfully become a father, but nature goes according to its laws. Olam kaminhago noheg v'holech. Nature goes according to its laws. And another one of my favorite passages that deal with this is a wonderful story in the Talmud, Shabbat 53b. It talks about a man whose wife dies in childbirth, and there's an infant, and there's nobody to nurse that infant. He does not have the money to pay the wages of a wet nurse, and the Talmud says a miracle occurred on his behalf, and he developed breasts like the breasts of a woman, and this man was able to nurse his baby. And then there's an argument between two rabbis. Rav Yosef said, see how great and wonderful a person this is, that a miracle of that magnitude was willing to happen on his behalf. The greater of the sages, a sage named Abaye, said, on the contrary, how dishonorable is this person that the order of creation was altered on his behalf. In other words, the approach of the rabbis is that nature needs to go according to its inexorable laws, and that God does not change the laws of nature, that we ought to see miracles within nature and not as changes in the laws of nature. And there's other sources that almost say this explicitly. Vote 5-6 talks about 6 different things that were literally built into nature at the eve of creation, and these are many of the things that later would be seen as miracles. The mouth of the earth that opened up to swallow up Korah, and the mouth of the well, Miriam's well, that gave water to the people as they wandered through the desert. These were not miraculous events, these were natural events that were built in creation from the very, very beginning. My favorite teaching from that particular passage is the very end of it where it says, Af tzava b'tzvat asuya. The tong to make the tongs. What does that mean? Well, to make a pair of tongs, you have to heat up metal and shape it, and you have to hold the metal up with a pair of tongs. How did you make that pair of tongs? Well, you had to heat up metal and hold it up with another pair of tongs. Well, where did the first set of tongs come from? And that was part of the miracle that was built into nature, that they were actually part of nature itself. How did the whole thing get started? And I read that and I think about how life evolved on Earth. In order to have life, you need DNA. But in order to have DNA, you need proteins. But in order to have proteins, you have to have DNA. Something had to kick the whole thing off. What came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the DNA or the protein? Well, they're both built into nature itself, DNA and proteins, and yet we look at this and we see that God acting not by changing the laws of nature. David Hume was right on that. God acting within nature itself. But nature itself is the miracle. Spinoza said it. The Jewish community kicked Spinoza out in Amsterdam long ago. I've always believed the time has come to welcome the brilliant Spinoza back in to the Jewish community and start to learn from many of his teachings.